Berlin in the late autumn of 1986 was a city steeped in history and shadows. The air was crisp, with a biting chill that seemed to seep into the bones of anyone who dared walk the dimly lit streets at night. The wall still divided the city, a concrete scar that bore witness to the tension and unease that permeated the lives of those on both sides. But amidst the political strife and Cold War paranoia, a far more personal terror was about to unfold. On a quiet, unassuming street in the district of Kreuzberg, nestled between the graffiti-covered walls and the flickering streetlights, stood a dilapidated apartment building. The locals referred to it simply as the Grey House, a moniker earned from the building's crumbling facade. Few knew who lived inside. The tenants were a transient lot, keeping to themselves and moving on as quickly as they had arrived. But there was one resident who had lived there for years, a reclusive man named Viktor Krieger. Viktor was an enigma, a man of few words and fewer friends. He was often seen shuffling through the streets at odd hours, his gaunt figure draped in an old, moth-eaten overcoat. His eyes, cold and unblinking, seemed to pierce through anyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. The neighbors whispered about him, speculating on his past, but none dared to ask. They sensed something was off about Viktor, something unsettling that made their skin crawl, though they could never quite put their finger on it. For years, Viktor had lived in the shadows, keeping to himself and going about his days with an eerie precision. But behind the closed doors of his dingy apartment, a sinister secret festered. Viktor was not just a lonely man, he was a predator, a hunter of the most depraved kind. His victims were chosen carefully, lured into his web of deceit and cruelty with promises of warmth and safety, only to be met with a fate far worse than death. On the night of November 3rd, a young woman named Anna Weiss was reported missing. She was a student at the nearby university, known for her bright smile and kind heart. She had been out with friends, celebrating the end of midterms, but when the night drew to a close, she never returned home. Her friends, worried and confused, searched the usual places, but there was no sign of Anna. By morning, they had called the police, and a search was launched. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no trace of Anna. Her face was plastered on missing person posters all over the city, her name spoken in hushed tones by those who feared the worst. But while the police scoured the city, Viktor Krieger remained calm, his routine unchanged. He knew the hunt would eventually fade, as it always did, and soon the city would forget about Anna Weiss, just as they had forgotten about the others. But the darkness that Viktor had nurtured for so long was beginning to grow, feeding on his depravity, and spreading its roots deep into his mind. The whispers in his head, once faint and manageable, were now a cacophony, urging him to take more, to feed the hunger that gnawed at his soul. He knew he had to be careful, to avoid drawing attention to himself, but the urge was becoming too strong to resist. And so, on a bitterly cold night in late November, Viktor set his sights on his next victim, a young man named Lukas Braun. Lukas was a musician, a dreamer with a gentle soul, who had recently moved to Berlin to chase his dreams. He lived in a small studio apartment, just a few blocks from the Grey House, spending his days composing melodies, and his nights playing at local bars. He was new to the city, unaware of the dangers that lurked in the shadows, and Viktor saw in him the perfect prey. Their paths crossed one night as Lukas was returning home after a late gig. The streets were empty, the air heavy with an ominous silence.